Have you ever felt like you were screaming underwater? You open your mouth, you use every ounce of air in your lungs, but no sound comes out. The world above the surface just keeps moving, completely unaware that you are drowning right beneath them. For 26-year-old Sarah, that feeling wasn't just a nightmare. It was her life. It was the reality she woke up to every single morning in a cramped, drafty apartment that smelled of damp wood and hopelessness. Sarah was invisible. She was the woman you bumped into on the street and didn't apologize to. She was the waitress whose name you never bothered to learn, even though she refilled your coffee 3 times. She was the ghost in the machine of Jerry's roadside diner, a place that sat on the edge of the highway like a forgotten memory, smelling of stale grease, burnt toast, and broken dreams. But Sarah wasn't just a waitress. She was a warrior. She was a mother fighting a silent, desperate war for her 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily, with her golden hair and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, was the only thing that kept Sarah's heart beating. But Lily was sick. Her asthma was getting worse, the damp apartment was making her cough through the night, and the medical bills were piling up like snowdrifts in a blizzard. On a rainy, gray Tuesday in November, Sarah was about to lose that war. The clouds outside were heavy and dark, pressing down on the roof of the diner, mirroring the crushing weight in Sarah's chest. She didn't know it yet, but the man who was about to walk through the door, a man who looked like he had walked straight out of a prison riot, was about to change the trajectory of her entire existence. He would terrify her. He would confuse her. And then he would leave her a tip of exactly $0. But what Sarah would discover hidden underneath his plate was not just paper and ink. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. And it was the key to a justice so sweet, it would bring a grown man to his knees. Before we dive into this incredible story of judgment, redemption, and a surprise that will leave you in tears, I have a small request. If you believe that true heroes often wear the strangest disguises, and that we should never judge a book by its cover, please hit that like button and subscribe to Biker Stories right now. It takes just a second, but it helps us bring you more powerful tales of justice and humanity every single day. To truly understand why that Tuesday was different, you have to understand the desperation that lived in Sarah's bones. It was 1:00 p.m., and the lunch rush was finally dying down. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, blurring the passing cars into streaks of gray and red. Inside, the diner was humid and loud. The clattering of silverware, the hiss of the fry grill, and the drone of the radio created a wall of noise that made Sarah's head pound. Her feet throbbed in shoes that were 2 years old. The soles had worn thin, and she had put cardboard inside them to stop the cold from seeping in. But it wasn't working. She had been on her feet since 5:00 a.m. Before coming to the diner, she had cleaned 2 office buildings downtown just to scrape together enough for groceries. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket against her hip, a sharp, angry vibration. She didn't need to look at it to know who it was. It was her landlord, Mr. Henderson. The text would be the same as yesterday, but with more capital letters. "Rent is 2 weeks late, Sarah." Friday was tomorrow. Sarah touched the pocket, feeling the phone like a hot coal. She had $64 in her bank account. She needed $600. She had sold her wedding ring 2 months ago. She had sold the TV. There was nothing left to sell. The panic rose in her throat, tasting like bile. If she lost the apartment, they would be on the street. If they were on the street, child services would take Lily. The thought made her knees weak. "Sarah, table 4 needs ketchup." The voice cut through her thoughts like a whip. It was Jerry, the owner of the diner. Jerry was a small man with a Napoleonic complex and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore cheap cologne that smelled like chemicals and regret, and he had hands that were always a little too quick to snatch the tips from the communal jar when he thought no one was looking. "I'm going, Jerry," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. She grabbed a bottle of ketchup and wiped the nozzle with a rag. "You're slow today," Jerry sneered, leaning over the counter, his voice low so the few remaining customers wouldn't hear. "You're walking around like a zombie. It's bad for business. If you can't keep up, Sarah, there are plenty of college girls looking for work. Prettier ones, ones who smile." Sarah bit her lip until she tasted iron. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the ketchup bottle. She wanted to tell him that she was tired because she was working 3 jobs to survive. But she couldn't. She swallowed her pride, just like she did every day. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not with winter coming. "I'm sorry, Jerry," she whispered. She hurried to table 4, pasting on a fake, bright smile that felt like a mask. She poured coffee. She took orders. She cleaned up spills. She was a machine, fueled only by the terrifying, overwhelming love she had for her daughter. Then, everything changed. The bell above the door jingled, but it wasn't a polite, welcoming jingle. The door was shoved open with such force that it slammed against the stopper. A gust of cold, wet wind blew into the diner, carrying the smell of rain, exhaust fumes, and gasoline. The atmosphere in the diner changed instantly. The chatter stopped. The clinking of silverware ceased. The old couple in the corner booth froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. He was huge. That was the first thing everyone noticed. He had to duck slightly to get his head under the doorframe. He took up the space of 2 men. He wore black denim jeans stained with road grease and mud, heavy engineer boots that thudded against the checkered floor, and a leather vest, a cut that looked like it had seen 1,000 storms. The leather was worn and gray at the edges, covered in patches. On the back of the vest, a large, terrifying patch stared out at the terrified patrons. A skull wearing a Spartan helmet, grinning with malicious intent. The rockers above and below read, "Iron Guardians MC." His beard was gray and thick, reaching down to his chest, unkempt and wild. His arms, thick as tree trunks, were covered in tattoos that faded into the sleeves of his thermal shirt. Skulls, daggers, flames. He wore a bandana low over his eyes and dark sunglasses, even though it was raining heavily outside. He was a hell angel in the eyes of the locals. A symbol of danger. A menace. A criminal. Sarah froze in the middle of the aisle. She held the coffee pot with both hands to stop them from shaking. She had heard stories about the biker clubs that passed through the county. Stories of bar fights, of loud noise, of trouble with the law. Jerry, the manager, went pale behind the counter. He hated bikers. He hated anything he couldn't control. He signaled frantically for Sarah to take the table, his eyes wide with panic. He didn't want to deal with this. He wanted the invisible girl to deal with the monster. Taking a deep breath, Sarah tried to steady her heart. She reminded herself that she was invisible. Just do the job. Just be the ghost. He just wants food, she told herself. Just food. She walked up to the booth where the giant man had squeezed himself in. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the door, a habit of men who have spent their lives watching for threats. He hadn't taken off his sunglasses. Rainwater dripped from his beard onto the table. "Can I?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper, cracking in the middle. The biker didn't look up immediately. He slowly reached up and removed his sunglasses. Sarah braced herself for mean, bloodshot eyes. Instead, she saw eyes that were surprisingly sharp. Blue, cold, and incredibly observant. They weren't the eyes of a brute. They were the eyes of a tactician. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time all day, someone didn't look through her. He looked at her. He scanned her face. He looked at the dark purple circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. He looked at the frayed collar of her uniform where she had stitched it back together. He looked at the way her hands shook slightly as she held the pot. He looked at the bruise on her wrist, a result of bumping into a shelf earlier, or perhaps something else. "Black," he rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together deep in a quarry. It was a voice that commanded attention without shouting. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. She moved to pour the coffee, but her nerves got the better of her. Her hand slipped. A splash of hot, dark liquid spilled over the rim of the cup and onto the pristine white table, right next to his leather glove. Sarah gasped. The sound was loud in the silent diner. "I'm so sorry." She reached for the rag in her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected him to yell. She expected him to complain to Jerry. She expected him to be the monster everyone thought he was. "Leave it," the man said. He wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. He was just still. "I'll clean it right up," Sarah stammered, wiping frantically. "I said leave it, girl," he said again, softer this time. "It's just coffee. You're shaking." Sarah looked at him, confused. She nodded, terrified, and retreated to the kitchen, feeling Jerry's angry eyes burning holes in her back. As Sarah entered the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, trying to stop her hands from trembling. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally drained. While the biker ate, Sarah tried to stay busy with other tables, but the diner was mostly empty now. The presence of the biker had cleared the place out faster than a fire alarm. Jerry was furious. He was pacing back and forth behind the counter, muttering to himself. He saw Sarah refilling the salt shakers and decided he needed a target for his frustration. He cornered her near the coffee station, blocking her path. Jerry hissed, jerking his head toward the biker. "Make sure he pays before he leaves. Those types, they like to dine and dash." "He's just eating, Jerry," Sarah whispered, tired of the conflict. Jerry snapped. His voice rose, loud enough for half the diner to hear. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "I'm sick of your attitude today, Sarah. You're ungrateful." Sarah flinched, trying to pull her arm away. "Jerry, please." Jerry laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You're hurting my business. Look at you. Your apron is stained. Your hair is a mess. You look like a charity case. No wonder your husband drove his car off that bridge." The world stopped. It was a low blow. A cruel, unnecessary, poisonous dagger straight to the heart. Sarah's eyes filled with hot tears. Her husband hadn't driven off the bridge on purpose. It was an accident. It was black ice. He was coming home early to surprise her for their anniversary. Jerry knew that. Everyone in town knew that. But he used it as a weapon. Sarah pulled her arm away, her strength fueled by shock. She turned away to hide her face, wiping her eyes furiously with her sleeve, trying to keep her composure. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of him. From across the room, at booth number 6, the biker stopped chewing. He hadn't looked around. He hadn't turned his head. He sat perfectly still, his fork hovering over his plate. But under the bandana, his ears had caught every single word. The biker, his road name was Breaker, though Sarah didn't know that, was the vice president of the Iron Guardians MC. He had spent 10 years in the Marines before joining the club. He had seen the worst of humanity, and he had seen the best. And Breaker had a very particular set of rules. A code. Rule number 1, you respect the patch. Rule number 2, you protect the weak. Rule number 3, you never, ever kick someone when they're down. Especially a woman. Especially a mother. Breaker slowly lowered his fork. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He watched Jerry smugly walk back to the register, looking satisfied with his bullying. He watched Sarah trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the walls. Breaker finished his meal in silence. The rage was building inside him, but it was a cold rage, controlled, calculated. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. He reached down and unhooked the heavy chain that connected his wallet to his belt loop. He pulled out a thick, worn leather wallet. He opened it and pulled out a $20 bill for a $12 meal. Then, he did something strange. He signaled Sarah over. Sarah approached, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She kept her head down. "Can I?" Breaker looked at her, really looked at her. It was the first time he had spoken since ordering. His voice was softer than before, though still deep and rumbling. Sarah forced a smile. It was painful to watch. "I'm fine, sir. Just a long day." Breaker grunted. He knew a lie when he heard one. He looked at the bill on the table. He took a pen from his vest pocket. He clicked it open. He stood up, towering over her. The sheer size of him made Sarah step back instinctively. He placed the $20 bill on the table. Then he looked directly at the counter where Jerry was watching like a hawk, waiting to see if the biker would steal the food. Breaker made a show of it. He picked up the receipt, wrote a big 0 on the tip line, and slashed a line through it. He signed it with a heavy hand. He left the receipt face up, right next to the cash. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She saw the 0. He hadn't tipped. Not a penny. Not a dime. After everything, after she had served him despite her fear, after he had seen her crying, after he had asked if she was okay, He was just like the rest of them. He was cruel. He didn't care about her. He judged her service based on her spilled coffee and her sad face. Breaker looked at Sarah. He leaned in close, invading her personal space. For a second, Sarah thought he was going to threaten her. "Keep the change for the register," Breaker said loudly, looking at Jerry. Then he turned his head slightly, his voice dropping to a rumble that only Sarah could hear. "Clean this table yourself. Do it now." And with that, he turned and walked out. The heavy boots thudded against the floor. The bell jingled. A moment later, the roar of a Harley-Davidson engine shook the windows, a thunderous sound that vibrated in Sarah's chest. And then he was gone. "Hold on, because things are about to get intense." Sarah is standing there, heartbroken, thinking she's been abandoned and mistreated by yet another man. But she has absolutely no idea what is actually waiting for her on that table. If you hate bullies like Jerry and want to see karma strike back, type "justice" in the comments below right now. And make sure you are subscribed to Biker Stories with notifications on so you don't miss what happens next. Sarah stared at the table. The zero on the tip line felt like a physical punch to the gut. She needed every dollar. Even a $2 tip would have bought Lily a chocolate bar, a small moment of joy. Jerry walked over, laughing. A cruel, triumphant laugh. "See, I told you. Trash. Absolute trash. Left you nothing." Jerry reached for the $20 bill. "I'll ring this up. You clean the mess." He snatched the money and the receipt, waving the zero tip in her face like a victory flag before walking away to the register, chuckling to himself. Sarah sighed, fighting back fresh tears. She felt hollowed out. She sprayed the table with cleaner, the smell of lemon chemical filling her nose. She wiped down the surface mechanically. Then, she reached for the heavy ceramic plate to stack it on top of the bowl. She lifted the plate. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her heart skipped a beat. Under the plate, there was something. It wasn't a napkin. It wasn't trash. It was a small, folded piece of paper. And inside the fold was a stack of cash. Sarah's hands trembled violently as she picked it up. She looked over her shoulder instantly, terrified that Jerry would see. But Jerry was busy counting the till, his back to her, humming a tune. She unfolded the paper, shielding it with her body. It wasn't just a few ones or fives. The face of Benjamin Franklin stared back at her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. $500. It was a fortune. It was more money than she made in 2 weeks. It was almost exactly what she needed for the rent. Gasoline poured onto the fire of her anxiety. Why? Why would he do this? Was it a mistake? Was it a trap? Then she saw the note written on the back of a business card. The card read, "Iron Guardians Auto Shop, Repairs and Custom Work." On the back, the handwriting was jagged and hurried, written in black ink. It read, "I saw him grab you. I heard what he said about your husband. Men who bully women are cowards. He doesn't deserve your tears, and he sure as hell doesn't deserve a tip. This is for you. Hide it. S." That made her blood run cold and hot at the same time. "If he touches you again, or if he's stealing your wages, call the number on this card." Sarah shoved the money and the card deep into her apron pocket, her heart racing faster than a piston. She looked out the window. The rain was still falling, but the world suddenly felt a little less cold, a little less gray. She had prayed for a miracle. She thought God would send an angel with wings. Instead, he sent a biker in leather named Breaker. But the story doesn't end there. The money was a lifeline, yes. But Jerry wasn't just a bully. He was a thief. He was a predator. And later that afternoon, his greed would drive him to make a fatal mistake. It was 5:00 p.m. The shift was over. Sarah was ready to leave. She had the $500 hidden in her shoe now. She felt safe for the first time in months. She could pay the rent. She could buy Lily medicine. "Sarah, in my office!" Jerry barked from the back. She froze. The knot in her stomach returned. She walked into the small, cramped office at the back of the diner. It smelled of stale smoke and old paper. Jerry was sitting at his desk, leaning back in his chair, looking at a clipboard. "I checked the inventory," Jerry lied, not looking her in the eye. We're short on steaks, and since you were the one waiting on that giant animal today, I'm assuming you gave him extra food for free. Maybe you were scared of him. Maybe you were flirting. Sarah protested, shocked. He ordered the special, that's all. I'm docking it from your pay, Jerry said, smiling that cruel, reptilian smile. And I'm docking you for the broken glass last week. He opened his drawer and pulled out an envelope with her name on it. He took out half the cash inside and put it in his own pocket. Here's the rest. He tossed the light envelope at her. Sarah cried out, her voice rising in desperation. That's illegal, Jerry. I worked 60 hours this week. I need that money for my daughter's rent. Jerry stood up. He was a small man, but in this room, he held the power. He walked around the desk and stood inches from her face. He hissed, "You shut your mouth. You take what I give you." Sarah looked at him. She looked at the man who had tormented her for 2 years. She thought about the $500 in her shoe. It would pay the rent this month. But what about next month? What about food? Jerry was stealing her life away, hour by hour. She remembered the note. We handle pests. Something inside Sarah snapped. It was the sound of a chain breaking. I quit, Sarah whispered. Jerry laughed, incredulous. You can't quit. You have nowhere to go. I quit, she said louder, her voice steady. She threw her apron on the floor. She turned and walked out. Jerry screamed after her, his face turning red. You'll be begging on the street, Sarah. Sarah ran out into the rain. She didn't look back. She sat in her rusted sedan, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't put the key in the ignition. She was sobbing, gasping for air. She pulled out the business card. Iron Guardians. She dialed the number. A deep voice answered on the second ring. Sarah asked, her voice broken. It's the waitress, from the diner. There was a pause on the line. The background noise of impact wrenches and metal stopped. The voice softened instantly. I remember. I quit. He refused to pay me. He stole my wages. Sarah was crying openly now. Breaker asked. His voice was calm, but deadly serious. In the parking lot. Stay there. Lock your doors. Do not engage, Sarah asked. Yeah, Breaker said. The line went dead. Sarah sat in the car, watching the rain hit the windshield. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. Jerry was back behind the counter, probably feeling smug, probably recounting the money he had stolen from her. He thought he had won. He thought she was powerless. Then, the floor of the car started to vibrate. It started as a low hum, deep in the earth. Then it grew into a growl. Then a deafening roar that shook the puddles in the parking lot. Lights cut through the rain and darkness. Headlights. Lots of them. One bike turned into the lot. A massive black Harley. Then another. Then 5. Then 10. Then 20. They rolled in like a thunderstorm made of steel and chrome. The noise was incredible. It was the sound of an army. The engines cut simultaneously. Silence fell heavy and thick over the parking lot. The door to the diner opened. Breaker walked in first. He had his vest on, his sunglasses off. But this time, he wasn't alone. Judge was older, with white hair and eyes that looked like they could see through concrete. And behind him, 12 other men in leather vests, looking like a tidal wave of judgment. They didn't sit down. They didn't order coffee. They filed into the diner and lined the walls. They crossed their arms. They stared. The few customers left in the diner scrambled to leave, leaving cash on the tables and running out the door. Jerry was alone. He swallowed hard. His hands shook as he wiped a glass. He looked small. He looked terrified. Jerry squeaked. Breaker walked straight to the counter. He placed a heavy gloved hand on the laminate surface. We're here for Sarah's check, Breaker said calmly. Jerry played dumb, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. The lady you just fired, the one you've been stealing from, Breaker said. Jerry yelled, trying to summon courage. She's a thief! Judge, Breaker nodded to the president. Judge stepped forward. He wasn't just a biker. In his civilian life, before he retired, He was a forensic accountant who had lost his license for doing the right thing in the wrong way. He knew numbers, and he knew fraud. "We've been hearing things about this place, Jerry," Judge said smoothly. "Wage theft, health code violations, blackmail." Jerry yelled, panic taking over. "Get out of my diner!" Judge smiled. It was a cold smile. "Go ahead." Blue and red lights flashed through the front window. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Jerry's face went white. He slumped against the soda machine. "See?" Breaker leaned in close over the counter. "We didn't come here to hurt you, Jerry. Beating you up would be too easy. We came to make sure the world sees you for what you really are." The bikers stepped aside as two police officers entered the diner. But they didn't walk toward the bikers. They walked toward Jerry. Sarah stepped in behind the officers. She looked small, wet from the rain, but she wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was holding her head high. She looked at Breaker. He gave her a small, imperceptible nod. A salute. "Ma'am," the officer said to Sarah. Breaker held up his phone. "Left it recording on the table when I went to the bathroom earlier. Accidentally left it running. Caught him threatening to dock her pay illegally. Caught him admitting to falsifying inventory." Jerry slumped. His legs gave out. It was over. Justice is rarely swift. But when the Iron Guardians are involved, it hits like a freight train. Jerry was arrested that night for fraud, embezzlement, and labor violations. The diner was closed down, seized by the bank. But the darkness ended there. Sarah used the money Breaker gave her to pay her rent. But that wasn't all. The club took up a collection that night. Nearly $2,000 in a helmet passed around the circle. They gave it to her to hire a lawyer to claim her back wages. 6 months later. The sun was shining. A new sign hung over a small, bright building on Main Street. Sarah stood behind the counter. She was the manager now. She looked healthy. Her eyes were bright. She was smiling, a real smile. The door jingled. The room went quiet, but not out of fear, out of respect. Breaker walked in, followed by the Guardians. They took up the entire back section. Sarah asked, laughing. "Same as always, Sarah," Breaker grunted, though his eyes crinkled at the corners. Sarah looked over to the corner booth where little Lily was coloring, sitting next to a tough-looking biker who was helping her with her ABCs. Sarah poured the coffee. Black. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. She was protected. She was family. Sometimes, help comes from the places we fear the most. Sarah thought she saw a monster in a leather vest. Instead, she found a guardian angel in disguise. It reminds us that character isn't defined by what you wear or what you ride. It's defined by what you do when you think no one is watching. Jerry thought no one was watching. He was wrong. Breaker acted when no one else would, and that made all the difference. What did you think of Breaker's way of handling the situation? Would you have stood up for Sarah? And be honest, would you have been scared if the Iron Guardians walked into your workplace? If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Don't forget to hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed to Biker Stories with notifications on. We have an even more incredible story coming tomorrow. Ride safe, take care of each other, and see you in the next one.